John. It's really great to have you here, and it was a real pleasure to meet you and talk about things in Bun Hill Fields. How is the book going? Because it was released a little while back.
I've been amazed. It's been more than I expected. It seemed there's a lot of people out there for whom an accessible way into Blake was something that they were waiting for. They sort of felt that they were drawn to Blake in some way, but something was stopping them getting sort of further in, and that's really what the book I was hoping would be. It's doing much better than I was expecting. So I'm delighted.
I read your book, William Blake versus the World, a totally impressive piece of scholarship.
Thank you.
It details with touching emotion Blake the artist and Blake the poet, and he lived a life that was in many ways hard. He died in penury. He had the devoted support of his wife Catherine throughout his life.
When you put Blake's life in concept like that, it sounds tragic. Yes. You know, he was mocked, he was ignored, he was dismissed. Yes. He had that one exhibition in his own lifetime, and he sold nothing. And he got a review that called him an unfortunate lunatic. Yes. And he ended up over there here in Bun Hill Fields in a pauper's burial. And it just sounds tragic. It sounds like the world destroyed him and defeated him. That's not the story of William Blake as far as I see it. There's this lovely tale. This little 6-year-old girl met the elderly Blake, and he said to her, "I hope when you're my age, you're as happy as I am." And she just looked up at this dishevelled, penniless old man, and she just couldn't comprehend what he was trying to say to her. It just seemed too weird. And it was only when she got to the very end of her life, when she got to about 80, that it suddenly made sense. And she realised what he'd been saying to her, and she realised the sense that this was a man who'd been living in paradise, essentially. His reputation has just very slowly just grown and grown and grown, and it took a long time in the 19th century for enough people to take him seriously, and then in the early 20th century the lyrics to the hymn Jerusalem were set to music by Hubert Parry, and that really helped, and the copyright of that was given to the women's suffrage movement, which gave it this sort of lovely radical edge. But after the Second World War, when the psychedelic counterculture arrived, they were looking for ways to understand the experiences that they were having on LSD and mushrooms and all these sort of things. And they obviously turned to Blake, because here was someone who, when they read his writings, they were like, this guy's been here before. And he's important because he's the only one who talks to a part of us that the rest of our culture seems to ignore. There's a transcendent edge in all of us, and we can feel it. We can feel it. But where do you go to sort of understand it? It has this ineffable, incomprehensible sort of side to it, and it's basically his whole sense of self collapsed, and that just sort of let in the most glorious light that absolutely changed his life and changed his world. And it's a very sort of, once you go looking for stories like that, it's a very common thing that happens across cultures, across centuries. The weakening and loss of the sense of self, which is this story that we tell ourselves, that part of our left brain comes up with. Blake personified this as this character, Urizen. Once we could slip outside of this sort of this story that we tell ourselves, being a human is just such a richer and more sort of glorious and sort of golden sort of thing than many people ever realise. And we're sort of hungry for mythology. Albion was sleeping, but he would awake. He was very, very clear on that. In every person, they can awake at any point in time. And he did it through creativity, through just working and painting and writing and using his imagination. For him, imagination was the way to do it. But he also saw the imagination as a Christian, and knew as a Christian that it could happen to that light going on inside you. It can happen to anyone at any time, and it doesn't have to just be imagination.
He didn't have the facility to go travelling, so in a sense he was travelling in the imagination, travelling in his mind.
Absolutely.
And reading voraciously and absorbing other influences?
Absolutely. He spent 3 years on the Sussex coast in Felpham, but other than that, he was just around this area. All walkable sort of distances, yeah. I always tend to think of the counterculture as a sort of R&D department for the rest of the culture. It tries out some mad shit, and if it's useful, then the culture nicks it off them and tries to monetize it and put it to work. But that's the role really, is to try and come up with something sort of good, yeah.
Yes. Every new thing is thought of as crazy to begin with.
Yeah, every new thing is crazy to begin with.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about Daisy, her illustrious late father Ken, and how your friendship started?
Sure. Daisy is a theatre director, and as you say, the daughter of the legendary Ken Campbell. If you're familiar with Ken Campbell, you'll know the significant impact he has on people's life. He's just one of those forces of nature, and she's very much a father's daughter.
I was asked to have a conversation for this Campfire event, and the obvious choice for me was Daisy Campbell, the theatre director, and many other things, as you'll probably tell as we start talking. But particularly, I wanted to ask about your one-woman show, Pigspurt's Daughter, which is here. How would you describe that to anyone who doesn't know it?
Well, it was a one-woman show. It was about my relationship with my father, who also would perform crazy, surreal one-person shows.
Ken
Campbell, yeah. But really, in a deeper sense for me, it was about the testing of the limits of living your life as if it is a story.
Yeah, that came across very, very well.
Yeah.
I wrote the foreword for the play when it was published.
Yeah.
And in here, I said, what did I say? Where was it? Talking about how you basically recreated an art form that your father basically mastered. I said, I think many of us, wowed as we were by the performance, hoped it would be the start of something. The baton had been passed from father to daughter, we thought, and the world would be able to look forward to brand new Daisy Campbell absurdist monologues touring the country every year or two. It does not look like that is the plan. Daisy is more interested in giving us what we need rather than what we want. She is not here to entertain us. She wants to suck us all into that extraordinary magical world that she lives in and see how we like it. Pigspurt's Daughter is an illustration of what we could have expected if Daisy had wanted to be recognised as great instead of wanting us to be great.
Oh,
is that fair?
I remember reading that for the first time. Yeah. It's more than it's an incredible thing to hear said about oneself. As I began to write this show, I knew I kind of had to beat him. That the only way to pay homage to him really was to beat him at his own game. Yeah. So one of the first thoughts I had was, I'll build my show to a similarly insane and surreal climax.
Yeah.
And then I will do it.
Yes.
Right. And that, by definition, I've taken care of that concern.
It's so quick to say. It's such an easy thing to say. It's just like 2 syllables.
Yeah, and there goes the next 6 years of my life. And my sanity. Yeah. Some might argue as well. So I declared at the end of Pigspurt's Daughter that as good Gnostics, we ought to go to CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, and commune, our nothing with the greatest concentration of nothing in the known universe, which does reside at CERN.
Yes.
And thinking, that a carload of lunatics could go and we'd get quite good material out of it.
Yeah.
Instead, I ended up having to book a 69-seater double-decker coach, and the thing just grew, and people started having dreams that we had to go to the temples of Damina, and then you suddenly had a vision. We had to start at the CERN Giant, so it was CERN to CERN.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yes, that was a logistical hellscape. But it was
right.
It was so right. It was so right. Art that's truly initiatory and transformative, it's got to completely cross over that line between where people's own stories themselves as story consumers and people who are actually the characters in their stories. Like, that line has to be crossed.
Yeah.
But I do feel like people, they know when they encounter something that is coming from that completely different place.
Yeah.
They know they can.
It's definitely.
I mean, I feel like the stage is moving out of brick and mortar theatres.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's been the immersive movement for some time, site specific, etc. But actually, you know, like the Cern to Cern pilgrimage, that for me was theatre, even though, you know, well, I don't know, you know.
Well, it had the same impact as what theatre was supposed to do on the people involved, even if it did take over their entire lives.
Yeah, exactly. And if that's what it takes, if that's what because we're so bombarded with storytelling, you have to cut through to actually have anything like the impact that the level of storytelling that we've got now is sublime, a lot of it.
Yeah. Right, well, thank you, Daisy. Lovely to talk to you.
Always, yeah.
Daisy is at Daisy Eris on Twitter if you need to stalk her or chase her or whatever people do these days. Thank you.
My pleasure. Always good to talk to you, John. Always.
Blake described a remarkable vision in verses he sent to Thomas Butts in October 1800, soon after arriving in Felpham. It was triggered by watching the sun from the yellow sands of the beach, which sent him to a place remote from desire. As Blake watched, each individual jewel-like particle of light revealed itself to be a tiny man, as did each grain of sand and every stone, mountain and hill. My eyes more and more, like a sea without shore, continue expanding, the heavens commanding, till the jewels of light, heavenly men, beaming bright, appeared as one man. Taken together, these countless tiny men were also one man. The universal man folded Blake into his arms and spoke gently, telling him that he was a ram horned with gold. And the voice faded mild. I remained as a child, all I ever had known, before me bright shone. That the experience had turned Blake into a child suggests a return to the innocent state of consciousness he experienced wandering the countryside as a youth. Of course, such an elated and ecstatic vision coming so soon after the melancholy he experienced in London would now be thought of as bipolar or manic depressive symptoms. Such a condition may have been a factor in his awareness of contraries. That's the Mark section. Yeah, that brings up whole areas of Blake's thought in there. There's a lot going on there.
Yes.
He's very clued up, you know, politically. He's very sort of radically politically, but at the same time, he's seeing angels and living in heaven, and the two are not, you know, incompatible. He certainly wasn't a case of someone who was comfortable, who could just sort of tune out the horrors of the world and just pretend that everything was nice and put his head in the sand. That's really not what he's doing when he's you know, declaring London's Jerusalem. That's not what he's doing at all. He sees how things are, but he also understands that how you see things is a separate thing. That there's a moral component to perception in Blake.
John, thanks. It's been amazing to meet you and interview you.
Thank you, Nick.
And thanks very much for coming along. I'm going to explore even more of your work than I have done, but I can heartily recommend this for anybody who just wants to get into William Blake and who wants to read about Blake and the imagination. So thanks, John Higgs.
Thank you.
Leaves me to say thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad that everybody was able to tune in, and so much more to learn and read about. So thanks for your time, John, now and before.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks for everyone involved. And there's been a lot of people putting all this together, and it's you know, it's much appreciated. All everyone's work. It's thank you all.